And you were live.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this regularly scheduled meeting of the Planning Commission of the City of Annapolis. We are now come to order. Ms. Hook, could you please call the roll?
Mr. Wallman,
I'm present.
Mr. Klein,
Present.
Mr. Imes,
Present.
Ms. Butler,
Here.
Mr. Sale.
Mr. Sale is ill, but we have a quorum and we have a very busy evening tonight. I am going to first of all, I want everybody to just bear with me as I'm not all that good at new things. So I'm going to try to share the documents tonight, and the first one would be the agenda. We can get through, I think, how do I scroll here? Let's see if I scroll, doesn't want to scroll. Minutes, can we, has everyone had the opportunity to review the minutes? Are there any changes or additions to those minutes? I understand that Ms. Hook did she made a couple of minor, editorial changes, but nothing of any substance. Do I hear a motion on those minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, second,
I'll second it.
any discussion?
I don't think I can vote on it because I wasn't on the minutes because I wasn't present.
Okay, fine. All in favor of approving the minutes as offered, say aye.
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 Okay, 3 and 1 abstention. Moving on to the findings, to the approval of the findings. Now, could take me a minute. Oh, wait a minute. I have to stop the share. Wait a minute. Help me out here. I have to find this document. Commission 520. Findings on, where are they? The STR findings, is that correct, Mr. Pline? So what we're voting on?
Correct.
Okay, now help me out here. What did I do wrong?
You don't have to display things.
I don't?
No.
Well, then I won't. You tell me when I
Okay.
do. Well, how about you guys tell me when you want me to display things, okay? Is there any discussion or editing of those findings as proposed? This was, if you recall, we came to a decision that we could neither approve nor deny, but we sent along certain recommendations that the council would consider on these STR findings. I think they have a pretty full bag on that one already.
I think for the record, that it wouldn't hurt to read the substantive paragraph.
And should I recuse myself right here so I don't hear it? If you want to, Julian,
No, you
take me
can-
off screen, that's fine.
No, you can certainly hear this. What's the issue?
I know that there's an opinion that related to Alderman Tierney, and she couldn't even be in the room when stuff was discussed, and I really don't want to go through anything more. So if Julian can just take me off of the call for a few minutes, that would be great.
Yeah, Diane, I'll put you back to an attendee, and then after this item, I'll bring you back forward, okay?
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay, I will read out loud the relevant paragraph under our recommendations. The Planning Commission did not support this legislation as written. The primary goal of the Planning Commission concerning short-term rentals is to maintain a viable community with residents, well, who are invested in the community. The commission found that the special exception process was not the proper mechanism to achieve this goal. However, if this legislation was to be passed by the City Council, it should consider several amendments. First, a set of clear and objective standards must be enumerated such that the Board of Appeals can apply them in a fair manner to all applicants. Second, as noted above, the ambiguity between the special exception process and the short-term rental license process must be resolved. And it's referring to a paragraph in the staff report. And third, the ambiguity of whether short-term rental licenses are allowed in mixed-use zones must also be resolved. If you recall, it was brought to our attention that there are several mixed-use zones that allow residences, but that the legislation applies only to, quote, residential zones. The Planning Commission held a public hearing April 15th and May 16th. Public comments received, posted, and the recommendations were approved with a vote of 3-0 with 1 abstention. I mean, we could go on and on. It's clear that this is just my comments at this point. It's clear that there's been a lot of discussion about short-term rentals. I have read through all of the comments that were received, some of them very well written, very well taken, very well thought out, and in some cases falling on both sides of the issue. But I think that just in terms of process, that the recommendations that we make address process rather than the policies at heart. Am I summarizing?
Yeah. So what I'll do is I'll make a motion to approve the findings,
Yes.
and then we can discuss them more if you need to. After I get a second.
That would be fine. The motion is made. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Okay. Is there any discussion? I just repeat, I'm not going to repeat what I just said.
No, I think you were very clear, and I do think there is a lot of ambiguity, and I do have issues with the Board of Appeals reviewing these as well. That's my strongest point, was the Board of Appeals aspect. But thank you.
Okay.
And for what it's worth, I didn't do this last time, but I would, the piece that I wrote in red, I would be happy to put that into the record, because I think it does go into some detail on the community aspect of this issue.
So if you would supply that comment to Ms. Hook,
Okay,
we will
will do.
make that part of the record as reflecting the discussion that we held at the last meeting.
Okay, I will do that.
The findings as written, do I hear a motion? Oh, we did have a motion to approve. We did have a second with no more discussion. All those in favor of approving these findings and sending the matter along to the council, please say aye.
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 Any negatives? Okay,
Do you mind if I sign for you, Bob?
I don't mind, nor speaking for Ben, I don't mind if you sign for him either.
Okay.
You can sign for me, it's fine. I would suggest, by the way, we didn't really do this before, but I would suggest that in terms of the agenda, that we, could you bring Ms. Butler back in, Mr. Jacques?
He's coming back right now.
All right, Ms. Butler, are you back with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. I'm going to suggest that we take this discussion of the rules changes for ex parte communications and so forth, and then we put it at the bottom of the agenda, and if we can get to it, we get to it, because there are other more timely things that we really do need to get to. Is that okay with you?
That's fine with me. And plus, I really never got to talk to Ben about the proposed changes and only had feedback from one other commissioner. So I'm fine if we actually had to bump it even further. But yes, if we can talk about it at the end, that's fine.
I'm going to assume you won't need me for that, although
Okay.
I've had
Well-
some discussion.
Wait. Something's having a problem here. Is that me? My internet connection is unstable?
Yeah, probably Bob.
All right, do we have a consensus that we can move that item to the end of our agenda?
Yes.
Yes.
No objections, fine. Let's move on to public hearings. It has been requested, the first on the agenda is the capital improvement plan. And we have members of the Public Works Department here. We did have a presentation from them last meeting. And is there anything, Dr. Nash, do you think that there's anything that needs to be added to what they said?
I don't think so unless you have further questions. We did not receive any additional public comments.
Okay, Actually, I do have a couple of questions, if it would be okay. One of the things that we came up with were questions about these traffic lights, was whether the lights that be installed could become part of a networked grid of programmed traffic lights. Department of Public Works, do you have any response to that?
Yes, good evening.
Mr. Johnson, good evening.
Good evening. The current CIP does not anticipate those lights being networked with the Anne Arundel County lights. Right now we don't use the same hardware, so it's a little difficult. It'll be a much larger project for us to have a sort of a regional network of lights. This particular project does not really anticipate that.
Well, I think my impression was that you're installing lights only in a Church Circle area downtown. Is that an incorrect understanding?
It's one of several lights in a longer term program, but that has the highest priority, so it went first.
Well, here's what we're concerned with. We've had several studies of not only downtown, the city dock area, but also the Forest Drive and Eastport sector study, which strongly recommended that all of the lights, for instance, along Bay Ridge coming out of Eastport and Hilltop Lane, be connected up with Forest Drive, so that not only in normal commuter rush hours, but also in emergencies, that these things could all start to function together. This was a very strong recommendation. Other recommendations in the city dock plans talked about programming and synchronizing the signals all up and down Main Street and over towards Gate 1 of the Academy. And so it would be, this is our opportunity to get systems that are in place. Now, Main Street doesn't need to synchronize with the county, but Bay Ridge does.
Yes, and Bay Ridge actually has a much lower, the Eastport lights have a much lower priority, and we would not get to those for a few fiscal years. So it is possible that we could, examine the scope or modify the scope to possibly consider that. Since we haven't really done the studies, I'm not in a position to really speak on that as a definitive course of action that the city will take, but it does seem like an opportunity. It's an obvious benefit to have your lights synchronized regionally. There's no argument against that.
No, I understand. I think what I'm trying to say is that I don't see the need to have Main Street and Church Circle lights synchronized regionally, but that they should synchronize locally if necessary, if possible.
And they will be able to do that because they're sort of the same type of hardware and so on like that. But interfacing with the county lights, that would require a bit more study and negotiation with the county to sort of make that happen. Okay. And it's possible that we could look at those for the Eastport lights, or lights that have a lower priority. And the priority was really given from a life safety perspective, and that's really what is driving the ranking of the projects.
I understand. And the highest priorities are like downtown, is that correct?
Correct. That's correct. They're the oldest lights. They're older than 35 years. They're suffering significant issues that our structural engineers have identified as being a clear and present problem that we should address expeditiously. Okay.
I think that the synchronization at whatever is possible is a very desirable goal with these opportunities presenting themselves now and in the future. So I'm sure you understand. I think we're speaking on the same line here.
Yes, I agree with you. We are.
Good. Another thing that neighbors raised in my area, in the Germantown Homewood area, is that, and they even referred me to page 33 of the budget, the capital budget, work on the little stretch of street from West Street over towards Smithville. It's sometimes called Russell, sometimes called Cape Villa or something. It's towards the Ceremony Coffee Shop and across from Coons, and it's a very, very unsafe traverse for both pedestrians and bicyclists, and that there are destinations at each end going in both directions. I'm going to propose a recommendation that this be moved up as soon as possible and accomplished. Now, I understand that there's planning issues, property lines, and all sorts of, it's not a simple matter. But I applaud the Department of Public Works for bringing this to the surface and moving on it as soon as possible. Okay?
Yes, definitely.
We're going to call that Russell Street.
Russell Street. Mhm. That's already in the CIP. And
Okay.
I think as you mentioned page 33.
Okay.
What is needed for Russell is a better scoping of what the project should include. And some of the challenges you did mention right away issues. There may be utility issues. There could be environmental due diligence issues that have to be examined before we are ready to execute that particular project. And we are working on getting that ready for delivery.
I haven't had the opportunity to drill down and look at it, but is it a design? Is it a design proposal funding, or is it construction funding?
Well, it's in air quotes construction funding, but it's not really rail funding in my opinion, because the scope isn't really clearly defined. So I don't think that we could say that that the budget that is sort of appropriated is sufficient to deliver that project. But once we've had an opportunity to go through and develop a proper scope, we will then have greater confidence with the budget numbers that are present, and will give us an ability to get that built.
Great. I will report that to my community if that's okay with you.
That's perfectly fine. Yes.
Oh, Bob, you know what? I misspoke. We did receive one comment on the CIP from Alderwoman Tierney. So I forgot to mention that before.
Thank you, Sally. I was gonna mention it later. And
oh, go ahead, Tammy.
No, I was just gonna say it's gonna be T1.
Well,
And actually, I don't know, Mr. Johnson, have you had a chance to read Alderwoman Tierney's comment about the traffic lights on Church Circle?
I did, yes.
Can you comment about that?
The Public Works Department has a strong difference of opinion as to the priorities for that particular street light. What is driving the ranking of the street lights are two things. First, a life safety concern. Many of those lights are aluminum in construction, are not very amenable to field repairs. That's really not an advisable way. You can do it with steel. With aluminum, it's a different animal to deal with. And there's that. And then given the project in totality, it triggers the ADA requirements and PROAG requirements, which are a federal law over which the city has no control. We must comply with it once we trigger that. So these improvements of the Church Circle light and the selection of the ranking of priority, which was developed by the firm Sabra Wang, they may have a different name now, but that was the firm that did the analysis. The structural engineers who did the analysis ranked them based on structural sufficiency, and that is the criteria that we use to rank our lights, for repair, for addressing them. So we feel strongly that we should follow what our structural engineers have advised us to do. It is in the city's best interest to do that, and we that's why we ranked it that way, and we feel that is the correct ranking to use.
Yeah, so that's the only question I had. I had a comment about that, but I guess we can, I don't know, Bob, do you want to wait until we get to a point where we're in a discussion period, or?
Yes,
Or
I
do
would
you-
like to wait. Let's finish with questions. So hold on to it and we'll do it.
Okay.
Any other questions of the Department of Public Works and Mr. Johnson?
I have one. Mr. Johnson, I was interested in the Weems and Whalen Field information. So is the cost that is being proposed to do further analysis of the contamination there, or for the structural cap, and whether it's going to be clay or something else?
The Maryland Department of Environment has not yet given us the remedy, that they're acceptable, that they find acceptable as to whether it's a dirt cap or a clay cap. So we have some additional environmental due diligence work that is needed. And that money that is proposed for fiscal years 22 CIP would allow us to complete that and to get a ruling from MDE, if you will, on what would be an acceptable way of capping off the ash.
And are you or thinking about, or is Department of Public Works thinking about the possibility of just doing a deed restriction so that no residential could be built on that property?
A deed restriction, I'm sorry, yes, go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted, please.
No, that's fine. I was just saying that has been, in my experience, sometimes an acceptable solution. And then there's not a lot of mitigation or remediation that takes place. It's often the cheapest thing. I'm not necessarily saying it's the best thing, but it's an option. And I didn't know whether we knew about it or we're considering it.
We are considering, and that property would be deed restricted, but we still do have to remediate it in accordance with the MD requirements of sort of capping it. I think that is, we have to do both. We would do both.
Right, a cap, not necessarily digging up and doing remediation.
Yeah, no, we do not want to dig it up. That's I think a cap is a far better environmental solution and economic solution. And and then with the deed restriction, it would make it usable for the public in a manner that is safe.
Right. We could even plant trees there if there are a lot of projects where people are looking to do their mitigation and plant trees. All right. Thank you for answering that. I was very curious. That helps me.
Sure.
Any other questions? Mr. Iams? Okay. I will close the public hearing on this and move forward to any discussion that anybody.
Planning Commission meeting, what's going on?
Mr. Klein, you had a comment?
Yeah, I mean, so back to the traffic lights, that, the issue, I think Alderwoman Tierney was really getting at was, it was really the bigger picture of whether we want to spend that kind of money on, essentially a complete, for Church Circle, a complete new traffic light setup that is going to satisfy all the standards that Mr. Johnson mentioned. And I understand how that works, that when you start to upgrade something like that, you have to follow the federal standards for accessibility. So I understand why the design gets to be what it is. But the other thing that Alderwoman Tierney mentioned was whether, the bigger picture, whether we really need traffic lights there. I mean, it is essentially a traffic circle. And I think the example that she gave in her testimony was Westgate Circle. That it's a similar sort of thing, but it has no lights. It has four entrance and exit points. And so I'm kind of, my thinking is generally along those kinds of lines too. I think that's for the most part, a very slow speed kind of affair. And, I sort of question whether we need all of that infrastructure that we're going to, have to pay for once, and then we're going to have to spend money to maintain it. I really question whether it's needed. And I know we cannot answer that question here. And, I don't think anybody on this call can really, has the expertise to answer that. But, I would hate that to me seems like an idea that's rooted in prior traffic control dogma that we're really trying to get away from. And, I would hate to spend $1 million on something that we really don't need or want. And I'd rather see, I wish there were some way that we could mitigate the structural problems to buy some time to perhaps look at that, look at that in a more considered way. And as Alderwoman Tierney mentioned, we have the opportunity to have a new director of transportation. And if that's somebody who could bring some fresh ideas, we might have an opportunity to do something downtown that makes that part of downtown a little less auto-centric. I think everybody has started to see the benefits of places for people and not cars. And I would hate to sort of cast in concrete, if you will, something that we're going to live with for another 30 years because we're going to spend a lot of money on it without a little bit more consideration.
Mr. Iams?
I agree. I agree. I'm not sure about the upkeep of it and whether it's worth it to have to worry about the maintenance of it. So I'm kind of on the fence, but I would like to learn more.
Ms. Butler?
Yeah, I feel like if we could wait a little longer, and if we do have a new director of transportation that can weigh in, what's the harm putting it off for another year?
Okay. I'm going to make a motion that the commission recommend approval of the capital budget with two additional recommendations. The first one is that the commission strongly recommends that all new traffic lights be capable of synchronization, either locally or regionally or both. That's my first additional recommendation. Do I have a second on that motion?
I second.
Any further discussion on the issue? Hearing no further discussion on that particular recommendation, I'm going to ask for a vote on that recommendation. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any nay? All right, 4-0. The second recommendation, additional recommendation that I propose is that the commission recommends that the Department of Public Works study Church Circle as a light, less traffic circle before committing funds to new construction. In other words, that you study that option and we might be saving, I don't know, somewhere between, $500,000. But anyway, that's my motion.
I'll second that.
Okay. Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, I'm going to ask for a vote on it. All in favor of adding that recommendation to our basic recommendation, please say aye.
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 Any nay? Okay. Dr. Nash, are you with us?
Yes, I've added that into the findings. So it now says the Planning Commission adds 2 additional recommendations. All new traffic lights be capable of synchronization, either locally, regionally, or both. And 2, that the Department of Public Works studies Church Circle as a light-less traffic circle before committing funds to new construction.
Okay, thank you. All in favor then of sending this along to the City Council with those those recommendations? Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll ask for a vote. All in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Any nay? Okay, so Mr. Johnson, you're now free of the Planning Commission on this issue. Findings are approved and you can move along. I have to underscore, I think it's a very good idea to take a look at doing away with lights on that circle and seeing what can be done.
Be that way.
Yeah, okay, good.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Sorry. Before we lose Director Johnson, I was looking at them again today, and I'm just going to make a suggestion. I'm not a licensed engineer, but is there any, when you say clear and present danger, is there any way that you could put a collar around the base of them where the where the erosion has happened. It's just something I thought, at first I thought, maybe you could just, dry pack them or something, but I thought maybe if you get a collar and fasten it, then they would be stable for the year that you do this study. But it's just a thought, that's all.
I don't believe that is an approved way of repairing aluminum tubing. I think there's unlike steel, where you can sort of like make the connection stronger than the base metal. It takes a bit more to do that, and that's something that we would have to have, our structural engineers take a look at to see if it is even feasible. I from what I've read about it on the repair of luminaires and things of that nature in the federal guidelines, that is not really an approved way of making that type of repair.
But it's temporary.
It's temporary.
But we see the problem that we face is this, that we have a report from our structural engineer, which identified not only that these structures are dangerous, or have dangerous conditions, but they also recommended strongly the time frame within which the city should act to mitigate the danger. And while there may be value in sort of looking at the roundabout, and roundabouts for pedestrians are a lot more challenging than seems to be apprehended by the comments that I'm hearing. You have a lot, Church Circle near the State Circle and so on like that is very heavy, particularly during session and at other times, with pedestrian movements. And it's not as simple to sort of account for that. Of course, you can design anything, right? And it could work, but it's going to take some time to study that. And I don't feel, from what we are told by our experts, the firms that we paid to do this, who are experts in this, that we have the time to sort of do what is being described. This is something that is exigent, that we are told based on the report, and I believe the report has been shared with many members here, right, in terms of the rankings. And the rankings were based primarily on, particularly those in the historic district, which are very old lights, on life safety issues, which I strongly recommend that the city mitigate in the strongest possible terms. They should mitigate.
It's now before the city council. Three aldermen who are here will have a chance to, to make a decision on how to proceed, and if they're persuaded one way or the other, or perhaps there is some time to take a look at this before you move forward with a very large project. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Have yourself a good evening.
Same to you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Let's see, I have to go to the next item on the agenda. Thank you. Share. I would like to, with the commission's, if there are no objections, I would like to move number 3, which is the site design plan review application by the gentleman in Eastport. I would like to look at that now. They've been very patient, and the rest of the agenda has to do with sort of policy discussion that we as a commission have, and there's no need for them to wait. So are there any objections to moving number 3 up to the next item?
No.
Okay, I'm going to do so. Mr. Scott, are you prepared here?
We already had the.
I am. Good evening, Mr. Vice Chair. Kevin Scott here with the Department of Planning and Zoning. And just to let you know, there hasn't been any additional public comments on this case or any additional exhibits from the May 6th hearing.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chairman Waldman, I have a quick question. I live around the corner from this house, and I know several people that wrote comments about it. So I would like to recuse myself from this vote.
Okay.
In the abundance of caution.
maybe an overabundance, but we don't live in a huge community, and it's inevitable that people who we know have items that come before us or make comments or feel strongly one way or the other about things before us, and that's just part of the tough job that we have to do sometimes. But that would be fun.
Then Bob, I don't think we would have a quorum for approval, so we'd have to wait till next meeting.
All right.
Plus, I don't think
well, Ms.
Diane heard
Ms.
this
Butler,
anyway.
yeah, unless she read in or listened to the record, she wasn't here last time anyway.
She wasn't.
Yeah, no, I
present.
listened to the entire thing, and as I was listening to it and then read the comments, I realized that I know the people. But I think if Chris Beard is still on the line, he's our attorney for the Planning Commission. And Chris, if you think that I can vote, I'm happy to do so. I don't want to hold this this plan up. It's just that I do know some of the people who live like right next door and around. They commented positively, and I just don't want to get in trouble for voting on this. So Chris, can you opine for us if you're still there?
Yes, can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't see a problem considering you may know him, but you've not indicated that it would weigh in one way or the other. So if you feel you can impartially make a decision, then you should participate.
Okay, thank you. Then
Okay.
I choose then to be able to vote if that's possible. Oh, Joel Braithwaite, if you have a comment, that would be great too.
And this is Joel Brave with the Office of Law. I concur with Mr. Beard.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any objections from other commissioners? Hearing none, I want to proceed. In which case, I will close the public hearing and move forward to discussion of this application. Any comment?
I guess
I
I'd
would
like,
just like to say that the applicant did a great job of talking to the neighbors, so I think that's much appreciated.
Yeah, I just wish we had been able to approve it last time. It was a shame to have to wait 2 weeks.
Mr. Hyams?
I feel the same way, and I think it's appropriate just to make a motion for approval at this point. So I'd like to make a motion for approval.
Second.
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion? I would like to say that I thought it was a very well done application. I really appreciate it, and I feel very badly. Well, I thank you for your patience, gentlemen, and good luck. With no further discussion, I'm going to call for a vote. Any other? All in favor of approving this application, please say aye.
Aye.
Any negative? None. Gentlemen, good luck.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your support.
Enjoy it.
Thank you very much. We appreciate your support.
Yes, thank you.
I'll get
Thank
the
you.
draft opinion out in a matter of days and I'll be signing off now.
Okay,
Thanks,
great.
Chris.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good. We're working on this
Thank you.
for you. You got it.
Thanks.
All right, I'm going to go back to our agenda. And I'm going to try to share it again. Okay. We can talk about the ordinance 0821. Dwellings above non-residential uses in the PM district. And for the purpose of creating standards for those dwellings to be permitted above the ground floor of non-residential uses and so forth. We had a little bit of a discussion on this before, and I want to know if anybody else has anything to add to this.
I have something to add. In an abundance of caution, I think I have to recuse myself because I own an accessory dwelling unit. And as we know from recent discussions, even though it may not be directly a conflict, there's the potential appearance of a conflict. So I think I would like to just.
I would like to respond to that. First of all, I'm not seeing a conflict personally. Others may differ from me, but the fact that you own an ADU on your property is not really affected by this legislation. What this legislation does is, first of all, it applies only to a zone in which you do not live, a PM zone, and it allows residential uses above commercial uses. So I'm not so sure that this really applies to you. You may be thinking that we're talking about the ADU legislation, but we're not. We're talking about this PM zone. So I would encourage you to consider staying in.
Okay, it's too bad Chris just got off the call, or I would have asked him to confirm that, because I don't want to make any decision to stay in and then get into any,
Right, Diane, so this legislation only applies to the PM district on West Street, but that is a question for the legislation after this one. And which case I'll text with Joel and see what he thinks. But I think you're okay to stay on this legislation, which is about the PM district.
Okay.
Yes, I with Bob. I'm with Bob, and I don't see a conflict with respect to this legislation, and we could address the other situation when it comes.
Very good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, good. I would like to move forward. I do have a comment on this, talk about conflicts of interest and so forth and kinds of things, the comment that I just made a moment ago. I happen to live in an area that is adjacent to a PM district on West Street in Germantown, Homewood. And it's interesting, our section of West Street consists on the Germantown side, not the Homewood side, but the north side of West Street, consists of two zones. One of them is a neighborhood conservation zone, which has, we're somewhat familiar with conservation zones, and it has a lot of regulation about not being able to demolish buildings and preserving the sort of human scale, the small scale of buildings. And then the other part of between basically a church that's on West Street and all the way down to the cemeteries is the PM zone. And interestingly, people in the neighborhood would like to see mixed use. They're very comfortable with saying a 3-story apartment building or a mixed use building. They're very comfortable with this. It would provide buffering to West Street, provide some new people for the school and so forth. But they also want to see the conservation elements that exist in the other half of West Street on the Germantown side. So my concern is that I would like to see some kind of a zone all the way from Legion Avenue to the cemeteries that has both aspects, the mixed use aspect and the conservation aspects. And so, Dr. Nash, do you think you could answer that for me?
Bob, I support your ideas, but the time for that is in the comp plan, and we are working on that because this is pretty narrow legislation. Okay. Given that, I've made myself known and irritated. Appreciate the reminder. That's what it is. In general, I think this is a very well taken piece of legislation. I mean, it's obvious. Of course, we should start allowing this in areas which are these kind of transitional areas. PM is a transitional zone. To me, it makes perfect sense. That's all I have to say about this. Anybody? All right, we have received some additional public comment on this that I forwarded to you earlier today. And we have a couple of speakers who would like to give live testimony as well. Oh, I beg your pardon, and I forgot that, and I started mouthing off before listening to other people. Why don't we take the live testimony first? And then there are very few written comments, and I will prepare myself to display those written comments when the live testimony is finished. Mr. Jacques, who's up next?
We have Grace Finnegan first.
Okay.
Grace, are you there?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, good evening, everybody. My name is Grace Finnegan. I live at 1208 McGuckian Street, and I support Ordinance 0821, the dwelling above non-residential use in the PM district. Excuse me. I've been an Annapolitan for over 50 years, and I own a 2-story commercial property in the city of Annapolis, located at 1008 West Street in the PM zone. The lower level of the building is my hair salon, Lenanettes of Annapolis, and the second floor is currently vacant. I started Lenanettes with my business partner 17 years ago, and we purchased the building I am currently in 14 years ago. The past 6 years have been very challenging for me. My business partner was diagnosed with a terminal illness in 2016. She passed away last September. This past year, the COVID epidemic has reduced my business income substantially. Many small businesses are hurting financially. I would like to be allowed to lease the second floor of my building as a studio apartment. The current zoning states that I'm not allowed to have a dwelling above the ground floor of non-residential uses. I have been working on trying to modify the ordinance for 2.5 years now, and I respectfully ask that the Planning Commission approve Ordinance 0821. It will allow me to utilize my building more efficiently and will enable other small business owners with similar circumstances to do the same. And I thank you for giving me the opportunity to present my case for the passage of Ordinance 0821.
Thank you, ma'am. Very well taken. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody, Mr. Jacques?
Yep. Next we have Joe Devlin. Joe, are you there?
I'm here. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Joe.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. My name is Joe Devlin. I'm an attorney here in Annapolis with the law firm of Counsel Barradell, Cosmero, and Nolan. And Grace Finnegan is a client of ours, mine, as well as my hairdresser for many years. And I'm just wanted to chime in. I think, Mr. Waldman, some of your comments in terms of West Street and these transitional zones are quite appropriate. When you look at the city code and the other zones that have this kind of a use, it's usually in this transitional type district where we're trying to make a blend or transition between commercial and residential. And I think that this is an appropriate zone, as Dr. Nash and the city planning and zoning people have noted, to allow this type of use. To again, as Ms. Finnegan indicated, we've had a tough time with the pandemic, and it just provides property owners in these appropriate zones, specifically the PM, to have a little more flexibility with regard to the use of their buildings. I think where the zones where it's allowed, it has allowed for a good transition, a good blend, if you will, between the commercial and the office with the residential that surrounds it. So we would ask that you consider recommending in favor of this legislation. We'd like to thank Alderman Payon for taking the time to move this issue forward. And again, we thank Dr. Nash and Office of Planning and Zoning for their comments, but it does seem to fit in terms of, again, this transitional concept, and we would ask you to support it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We received also a little bit late. I'm going to ask the commissioners what they feel about this, but I think that Mr. Devlin wasn't aware that we have a pretty firm deadline of noon on the day of a hearing for public comments, and came in a few hours late. It consists of a sheet that Ms. Finnegan prepared for her customers as to what they thought of it, I believe. May take some explanation. I think I got it right. Does the commission feel comfortable in accepting this piece of evidence, even though it came in post-deadline?
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Iams?
Yes.
Okay. And I think that in the future, Mr. Devlin now knows. It really helps us, our process, if things come in early and then we have the afternoon to review them. I will now share this piece of evidence, and I will do my best to scroll. My computer doesn't really like to do things sometimes. I don't know how to do it. It was prepared by Lena Netz of Annapolis, which I believe is Ms. Finnegan's. And I have to apologize. I can't seem to scroll this. I don't know how to, well, let me try something. The little arrow in the corner, do you think that might work? Oh, yes, thank you. And it consists of a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
And those are some adjacent property owners as opposed to necessarily customers that Ms.
Yes.
Finnegan just simply ran
I'm
into.
not sure if you can still hear me, but yes, that is correct.
Oh, some of them are some of the adjoining property or nearby
Yes,
property owners?
it's
Oh, thank you.
other-
Okay.
Other businesses in the area.
Oh, I see. They're businesses. Pardon me.
There are a few residential people who are very close to the salon.
Okay, fine. This piece of evidence is accepted?
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, good. If there are, were there other public comments submitted in connection with this proposed legislation? I don't think that there were.
Sure,
There was two
one
written,
more.
two written comments.
Well,
They
there
were
were, one was from Ms. Finnegan and one was from Mr. Devlin.
Exactly. So do you
Okay.
want those in the record?
Fine.
Okay. It's
Have you heard,
T3 and
Mr. Chair?
T4.
Is there any further discussion? Mr. Payon, would you like to speak?
Well, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right.
You're going to hear some words from me you very seldom over the years have heard. I agree with you. And that goes way back before I was on the council. I think that I was surprised and disappointed to find out that Ms. Finnegan could not use the upstairs as a residence. And I think that is, I'm not going to say it's unfair, but I think that the commission really ought to approve this. I think it's good for the neighborhood, good for Ms. Finnegan, good for all of us. Thank you.
Good. Anything further? I could only add, since I'm so familiar with this area, that that whole 4 or 5 block stretch of West Street on that side has been preserved with, a very interesting neighborhood feel, human scale buildings. And as we've learned, the opportunity to be flexible with some of that upstairs, I think it was imagined, projected back in 1986 when some of this happened, that there would be, this kind of thing would be allowed. And I think that this is just one of those kind of administrative oversights that needs correction.
I agree with you.
Yeah, and I can tell you that my neighbors are very, they're very much in favor of moving forward with the modernization of what goes on West Street, but maintaining the human scale of things. With that said, any other comments?
Yeah, I think furthermore, it just gets us a step closer to what's likely to be espoused in the comp plan with the combining of many of the mixed use zones into something a little bit more sane that doesn't require a land use lawyer to do anything. So I think this is really going to help just get us in that direction.
Right. It's analogous to ADU legislation in some ways, allowing flexibility in residences and here, there, and the other place. No, it's very well taken. Ms.
Can
Butler,
I
Mr.
just
Ott?
check, Julian, was there no one else who was testifying on this? Anna Henry?
Yeah, Anna Henry signed up, but she is not here.
Okay.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Nope.
All right, I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion on this legislation?
I move to approve it.
I will second.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none. I'm going to ask for a vote. All those in favor of approving ordinance 821, please say aye.
Aye.
Any negatives? None. Is there a findings prepared?
No, but I can prepare it unless someone wants to volunteer. I can work on it and send it out for your review.
Yeah, I don't think it has to really say anything. I mean, if you want to send it, I can add some of our comments to it. I'll be happy to do that.
Great, thank
Beautiful.
you.
Great, thank you. So we'll approve that next time. All right, well, so far we're doing pretty well. Let me see if I can share my agenda, commission agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Fred.
Good. Yeah.
Alderman
this is-
Pam.
Hey.
Yeah, very good piece of legislation. All right. Moving along to accessory dwelling units. for the purpose of establishing accessory dwelling units as accessory uses in certain zoning districts that allow single-family dwelling units, establishing the requirements and so forth for that. So ordinance 0921. This is the first public hearing, so we will hear a staff report to get us started.
All right, good evening. First, should we hear from Mr. Brathwaite about Diane Butler's question?
Jerry, thank you very much.
Okay, so this now, if I understand the facts correctly, this is a ADU legislation that affects all units throughout the city of Annapolis?
That is
And- yeah.
correct, although Diane Butler has a pre-existing legal accessory dwelling unit. So I guess this would make her accessory dwelling unit, so it wouldn't change the status of her dwelling unit.
Yes, I'm hard pressed to find a reason to say she shouldn't proceed with participation because the excess, whatever the name of the structure that exists, it exists by permit of the city of Annapolis under our existing laws. And she was able and authorized, duly authorized to build the unit that she built on her property. Regardless of if we now seek to put a name to it and it may be reclassified as accessory dwelling unit, it wasn't approved as such. So I don't believe that there's a basis to say that Ms. Butler should be precluded from participating as a commissioner for being actually a lawful owner of a property that was duly permitted. So I'm not sure where I see a conflict that would preclude her from participating because she has a legal structure.
There is one wrinkle, however, in that this legislation I believe would make it so she could not use her accessory dwelling unit as a short-term rental or her own property as a short-term rental. I don't know if she does that, but.
Well, I think I use the short-term, rental that's attached to my house as a long-term. I mean, I've used it that way since the existence or since I've owned the house. So it's always been long-term. But the fact remains that I could turn it into a short term if this person, my long-term tenant moves out. So in that respect, maybe that could be considered the appearance of.
Okay. All right, well, that in mind, I think that the two issues then combine, and I think thank you for the fact, and the fact has probably changed my reasoning somewhat. And I'm probably only grading this at probably a 50%, not even 51%. But probably 50-50 in terms of the addition of the new fact of a potential legal use of your property for potential rentals. It's just a commission out of one thing that's within her right.
Yeah, I do feel out of an abundance of caution, I should just step out of the meeting and just join back in when this discussion is over.
Mr. Brathwaite, if we only have 3 people left, is there a quorum? You know that the commission has 7.
I believe that there are 5 commissioners appointed currently.
It's what?
How many do we have appointed currently?
5.
So if we have 5, 3 is a majority of 5. If the 3 of you hear this and the 4th person doesn't become qualified, you would need 100% of the 3 people present to be able to hear it. And then, but once you call the vote, it's either you vote tonight or you vote on a different night. But when you call the vote, you would need a majority of those present, not a majority. Yes, a majority of those present to make it an official action of the board.
So 2 out of the 3.
No.
No, all 3?
I'm thinking 3. I'm thinking it's going to be 3 of the 3 that are present. Even if someone else qualifies by watching the video, then it still have to be 3 or 4 because otherwise you'll have a 50-50 split.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, we will proceed on. Is there any questions of Mr. Brathwaite?
No, I would just like to state for the record that I'm recusing myself from this matter, and I will sign off until somebody adds me back in. Thank you.
Okay, could I just clarify, Mr. Brathwaite? I was under the impression that 3 was not a quorum, but you're saying because it's more than half of the 5 appointed?
Yes, so unless their rules state that 4 is a quorum, 3, the majority of those appointed would create the quorum.
Okay.
I believe that their rules do require there be 4 as a quorum, but here's a suggestion. You can hear this tonight and Ben can watch the video and then you could vote on it. And after then he would be able to participate at the next meeting and you would have 4 people participating in the continued hearing. The Board of Appeals has followed that procedure in the past.
And that is an approval procedure that the court, the Office of Law rather supports.
Okay. Anything?
I will be happy to communicate to Ben, that he needs to watch the video for tonight, this portion of the video as it relates to this piece of legislation.
Tell him that it starts at 8 p.m. If you
Okay.
would. Great, thank you.
I'm happy to do so when he feels better.
Great, thank you. Okay. Okay, with that out of the way, are we prepared to proceed?
All right, yes, your rules, for the record, your rules do say 4 members of the Planning Commission shall constitute a quorum for the transaction of business. So now we know. Okay, so that is settled. Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm Sally Nash, Department of Planning and Zoning Director. And tonight we are here to talk about Ordinance 0921, which is accessory dwelling units. You might remember a similar attempt a few months ago, maybe a year ago. It was a little bit more convoluted. This ordinance is much more straightforward, and so I think you'll see it has fewer nooks and crannies to it, as it were. But this ordinance proposes allowing accessory dwelling units in all residential zoning in the city. So not any of the mixed use or business districts that allow residential uses, but only the residential districts in the city. And it includes a certain number of standards that would apply to these accessory dwelling units, which are that there can only be 1 per lot, that the accessory dwelling unit may be established within a primary structure or within an accessory structure. So either in the main house or in a garage, for example. That each accessory dwelling unit shall have its own separate ingress and egress. That the maximum size of an accessory dwelling unit is 850 square feet of livable space. And a rental license is required in accordance with Chapter 1744, and that the ADU cannot be used as a short-term rental, nor can the primary dwelling unit be used as a short-term rental. In about half of the zoning districts, this would be permitted, just subject to the above mentioned standards. In the conservation districts, including R2 and C, R3 and C, R3 and C2, C1 and C1A, which includes downtown, this would be a special exception use. And I've included maps in my staff report of these different zoning districts where the accessory dwelling unit would be a special exception use. I also described the purposes of these zoning districts so you can see why they were chosen for a heightened level of scrutiny for accessory dwelling units. And I just want to be clear that anything that's in 21, as far as development standards, critical area, et cetera, would apply to new dwelling unit construction as far as lot coverage and tree removal. Also, anything in Title 17 that governs our rental licenses and other property maintenance code issues would also apply. As well as the number of people who can live in a habitable space. As I know, sometimes there are concerns about overcrowding in accessory dwelling units. So ADUs would be subject to all of these regulations.
Okay.
Can you refresh my memory what section of the code the number of people per unit that you mentioned? I always have trouble finding that again. Can you give me that reference?
In section 17.40.460, it's called habitable floor area. And it states that every dwelling unit shall contain at least 150 square feet of habitable floor area for the first occupant, at least 100 square feet of additional habitable floor area for each of the next 3 occupants, and at least 75 square feet of additional habitable floor area for each additional occupant.
Thanks. I just made a note of that section so I can go back and find it when I need to eventually. Thanks.
Are there any questions for staff?
Just while I have the floor, on the special exception, are there standards that go along with those beyond what's in the code for those zones? Are there anything unique to ADUs?
No, only the standards that apply to all ADUs.
What are the standards that would be applied for a special exception?
The standards that apply for a special exception are listed on page 5 of the staff report. They include provisions such as that the establishment of the use will not be detrimental to public health, safety, morals, convenience, or general welfare, that the special exception won't be injurious to the use and enjoyment of other property in the immediate vicinity, that the establishment of the special exception will not impede normal and orderly development, that there's adequate utilities, access roads, drainage, and necessary facilities, that adequate measures have been taken to provide ingress and egress designed to minimize traffic congestion. The special exception shall in all other respects conform to the applicable regulations of the district in which it is located. Those are the ones that would apply to an accessory dwelling unit.
But those are just generic and not part of.
Those are our generic special exception standards.
Right, that's what I mean. They're not particular to ADUs. It's just for anything.
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, what I was really getting at is whether there are any standards unique to the ADU special exception, and the answer is no.
Correct.
Okay.
We received a couple of public comments, and I believe there are 2 people here tonight to testify, to give live testimony.
Okay. What about parking spaces? Is that one of the requirements?
That is a requirement. I think I skipped that one. I'm sorry. That one off-street parking space is required for every accessory dwelling unit.
In your opinion, if an owner of an ADU downtown provided a proof of a long-term rental in one of the parking garages, would that qualify?
Not as currently written.
Okay. It can, when we get to public discussion, perhaps somebody with more knowledge downtown could answer this, whether that's possible for, whether it's possible to rent monthly a parking space in the Hillman or up or Gotts Court or anywhere. If that's possible, I think I'd like to get an answer to that at some point, because it may be a solution to places that are very, that are very tight. Okay.
Along those lines, another question about parking is, so that one spot is in addition to any required parking for the primary structure?
Yes, because there is for every dwelling unit, there is a off-street parking requirement.
There is?
Yes, I mean, a lot of places don't necessarily meet that requirement, but for new dwelling units, that is a requirement.
For new ones.
Right, so that's kind of gets to my question, is if you have, essentially an ADU that's been, it's a garage that's been there, that predates our zoning, and say there were two off-street spots for the primary and the ADU, could one of those be considered, accounting for the ADU because, it's not new construction? Essentially, if the existing structure was sort of non-conforming from that requirement, would one of those parking spots be allowed to satisfy that requirement because the thing's non-conforming anyway?
I would have to think about that. It's possible, but I'd have to give that a little more thought.
Okay. Any other questions at this time of staff? Just to get our basic facts straight. Okay. What I would suggest is that we have 3 alderpersons here, and I would like to provide them the courtesy of speaking first, which does not, of course, preclude them from speaking later as well, as we all know. But why don't we start off with the alder people? Mr. Schandelmeyer, I see you're really ready to roll here. So if you'd unmute yourself, we'll take the youngest person first. How's that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do want to say I plan on getting rid of that parking requirement. I wrote this and then getting more research. I've seen that it doesn't really significantly increase when other jurisdictions have implemented this. It has not significantly increased the parking. It goes up, the amount of cars parked on the street goes up not even a full percentage point. So I'm going to get rid of it. I just haven't had the opportunity to forward that out to our law office yet.
Okay. Okay. Is there, you're one of the sponsors of this legislation, are you not?
I'm the lead sponsor.
What would you like to say about it?
Well, that housing prices, both rentals and purchasing in this city, have skyrocketed recently. And a large part of that is due to the lack of units. This is a way to bring about some gentle density and gentle access of housing opportunities for folks. And I will say that I am a success story of an accessory dwelling unit being allowed. I moved into an accessory dwelling unit when I first came to this city, and now I represent a ward in it. It's a way for young people to start out on their own and build themselves up. It's a way for elderly members of our community to age in place or live near family members in the community that they've always called their home. And finally, it's a way for people who are in transition, either through new career opportunities or through the ending of marriages or relationships, to have a stable place in their home to live in.
What is the definition of long-term compared to short-term?
I was just going off of whatever the city defines it as. For me, if it's a month to month, I will count that as a long-term. Dr. Nash, I believe short-term rental is defined as 2 weeks or less. Is that correct?
No, 90 days, fewer than 90 days.
Oh.
And along those lines, can you explain your rationale for excluding short-term rentals?
I want this to apply to be housing, not lodging. A short-term rental they're fine. They're a good opportunity to let new visitors come to our city. But for me, the biggest priority in our city is not lack of available lodging places. It's the lack of actual housing that people can afford.
Thanks. That's an interesting way to put that. I've never heard it quite put that way, and that's a very succinct way to, I think, sum up a lot of the discussion. I don't want this to turn into an ADU or into a short-term rental discussion, but that's really an interesting way to put that. Thank you.
What other jurisdictions have you researched? What have you found?
Montgomery County has done this successfully. Portland, Oregon has done this successfully. And truth be told, these units are already in the city. I lived in an off-the-book one. These are essentially just a way to bring these forward, make sure they're regulated, make sure that they are safe, and so that we can ensure that when people move into the city, they're in a housing situation that is decent.
Are there enforcement provisions to the legislation?
Dr. Nash, I mean, essentially, I don't know off the top of my head what the exact enforcement provisions are here and there, but here's what I will say. We need to ensure that these things are safe. I went over with Dr. Nash and the rest of our people in planning and zoning to ensure that if these are inspected, will be inspected just like traditional rental properties, that if the accessory unit is within a structure that is already touching a home, such as a basement or an attic apartment, that they have to follow proper fire code, proper fire resisting sheetrock, and all those things to ensure that the fires do not spread quickly and that other residents in the home are able to escape in time.
Right. So if someone ends up trying to use it as a short-term rental, we would catch that through our new host compliance software that combs listing sites like Airbnb for postings and cross-list them with approved short-term rental licenses. If it's a long-term rental, they would be required to have a rental license, which is an annual inspection. And if they were building a new unit, they'd have to meet all new zoning and building code requirements.
Do you have any idea of what kind of pressure this will be placed on the inspection crew? The rental inspection crew, not the building permit crew, but the rental inspection and so forth?
I'm not really anticipating a cascade of activity. I'm sort of anticipating more of a trickle. I'm hoping that the legal ones will come into compliance. And that might be a burst of activity. And then I hope it's kind of just a steady rate that we can deal with, with on our usual schedule.
Okay, thanks. Mr.
I also
Schandelmeyer?
want to point out that we don't really bring that question up for regular rental housing. I know this seems like a new thing, and so there's some hesitancy, but it's going to be handled the same way as other rental houses. It's
What has been the experience in Montgomery County in terms of the number of new permit requests?
That under the best case of scenarios, there is about 2% of single family households build one of these when the best circumstances are met. I don't know specific numbers off the top of my head, but it is, again, on average, with best practices put in place, such as removing parking requirements, making these by right, you usually only get 2 to 3% of households building these.
So 2% of the existing single-family houses will, over some period of time, build an ADU.
That is what has been seen in other jurisdictions that have adopted the best practices for these.
And best practices include doing away with the parking requirement?
Yes, and just basically making these things go by right. where people don't need to go through very long-term planning processes. They can just.
Would you be comfortable if in the special conservation districts, there was an additional standard that did require some provision for parking?
I don't think that housing for cars is more important than housing for people. So.
But people who live down there now may say, you know, by the way, 3 new cars on our block will tip us over the edge. Do you think that requiring in the conservation districts only, that add that as a special exception requirement, and that the possibility of renting a monthly space can satisfy that requirement?
Why is their parking space more important than a place for someone to live?
Okay, because you're talking about the people who already live there.
Why do we want to shut the gate on new people coming in just because someone's got theirs? I mean, this is a fundamental, Mr. Chairman, with all due respect, this is a fundamental difference in our philosophies. I think that we need to actually have a housing for people. If we put in these things like parking requirements, it's an additional barrier. These things don't get built. And if we don't build them, we're going to continue to see the habit where new people cannot afford to live in this city. And people who live here currently eventually get priced out, because when you restrict the supply of something and demand is high, prices go up.
Okay. I don't think that you know what my philosophy is. I'm asking questions because I think that these are questions that other people have raised, and I think that they deserve answers. And I think that we might hear from people who represent areas which are, you know, have very high population density and low parking capacity as is. So we may hear from others this evening. Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions that anybody has? Mr. Pline, Mr. Iams?
Not at this time. I am concerned, you know, learning more about the parking issue. I do realize there are a lot of these illegal throughout the city. So part of bringing it into compliance is good. And I definitely agree that short term should be no shorter than 90 days, of course, but that's not part of the legislation, of course. But I think this is a good start towards bringing things into compliance, because you know they're all there. A lot of them are already there.
Okay.
And I will say with parking again, Montgomery County did a study on this, and there was an average of per household 2.1 cars per person, and it went up to 2.5. It's not a full percentage point.
And Mr. Pline?
I think this is much easier to understand than what we had seen in the past. So I applaud the sponsors for keeping it simple, because I think that's really important. I mean, for any legislation, it needs to be simple, and I think this does not add, the questions we've asked aside. I think this does not really add a lot to the code, other than saying essentially allowing things that are already there and allowing for a little extra. So
we're not done yet.
I think it's well done.
Alderman Tierney? Alderman Tierney, would you like to speak?
Thank you. Let's see, general comment was, at first I was very concerned about this ordinance being sort of a one size fits all for all the, specific various densities of each ward and situations. But I see that Dr. Nash has introduced some special exception process for particular zones, and I was just curious on what the rationale for that was and what those zones were again. I'm sorry, I should know that.
The conservation zones, including C1 and C1A. I didn't do that. That was in the legislation as drafted. So maybe Alderman Schandelmeyer can speak to that, but what I believe it came from was the last legislation was that was discussed for accessory dwelling units. And I believe that was even an amendment at one point that Alderman Arnett made. So I think that got carried through to this legislation.
The rationale was there's already exceptions that need to go through for accessory structures in those areas. So if someone were to build a new structure in those areas currently, whether it's being used as a dwelling unit or not, they'd have to go through those approval processes. So this just makes sure that if that accessory structure is going to be used as a house, go through that process.
The other question I had was what is the mechanics in verifying how something now is not in compliance? I mean, I don't get that. I mean, what do you do? Do you proactively go through the neighborhoods and look at these structures, or I'm not really sure how that's enforced. You know, if I'm hearing there's existing illegal ones, what do you do about that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't understand about existing ones that are illegal.
Yeah, allegedly.
That are illegal. Okay, that were not permitted. Right, well, we'll have to do some public information outreach. Make sure everyone knows that this is now legal use to come into compliance. And then we will probably catch some through our host compliance monitoring, at least the short-term rental ones. The long-term ones will be trickier to find. That's why we don't find them now, is because it's very hard to figure out if it's a completely separate dwelling unit or not.
Yeah, I only ask because of, courtesy to my colleague, Alderwoman Pendle Charles. I know that's one of her, concerns is the existence of these allegedly illegal ones, and this might, just I don't know, add to it or whatever. But yeah, so that's good. Specific to Ward 1, as you know, we have the existing aging inventory of dwellings, and so this would optimize the use of them, and also introduce housing that the word affordable means different things in different wards, but in Ward 1 it would be a space for in-laws or whatever. I mean, I think all of us at one point of our lives probably lived in a granny flat somewhere. So I think it's an optimal application in Ward 1, specifically the granny flat. I do have constituents in Murray Hill that are concerned about an increase in density in what they purchased as a single family zone, and I'm not sure how to address that concern with them. That's specific in Murray Hill, where I don't really know. I can't imagine like somebody's actually going to build, or are they going to reuse their garage? Reusing existing footprint. But we've heard testimony on that. I'm not really sure how to address that concern, about introducing more density in a single family zone. But again, in what Alderman Schottlemeier said, we've got to keep this in the concept of this is about housing and providing affordable housing. And I think the logic in the short-term rentals, which will probably get pushed back because people want, the right to do what they want to do with their houses, but it voids the principle of this being specifically to introduce long-term housing. So yeah, it should be interesting. And I applaud the rebirth of this, because I know the first one was kind of confusing, but I think we have to find a way to make this work.
Mr. Arnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess my major concern is whether the juice is worth the squeeze. If this was accessible, accessory dwelling units in its most generic form, I think that's a different thing than assuming this is going to provide affordable housing. And I think there's very little evidence that it will provide affordable housing, and particularly when you consider the investment that's required to put these in place. But I think the bigger concern is the whole enforcement issue. I also think it's fairly cavalier to just throw away the parking requirements, given the amount of grief I get virtually every day about parking and traffic. I think that those enforcement issues are going to be a very big concern. I think we already have a lot of concerns about enforcing short-term rental units, and I don't think have any evidence we're going to be any more successful in enforcing the accessory dwelling units. But we'll see. I think that we need to be sure that these are going to be inspected and licensed, just like any other rental unit. And we'll see what that develops. I do not think comparing historic small-scale Annapolis to relatively suburban Montgomery County is a very fair comparison. I'd like to see a comparison with, say, Old Town Alexandria or someplace else that's a colonial town. But we'll see how this develops.
What I would say for those comparisons is the areas in this city that have that traditional colonial vibe are essentially limited to parts of the historic district and parts of Eastport and Murray Hill, maybe somewhat. The rest of this city has a lot of developments that were built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s and 2000s.
Actually, Parole is quite contemporary with Eastport. There are a lot of old sections of the city with small houses and small lots.
Again, though, these are built in the 50s, top 50s or 40s. That's not colonial era.
Yeah.
And I think that restricting another opportunity for housing based on community character is something that doesn't really make sense to me, because people need a place to live.
I think we have to evaluate the role of government in supplying the housing, particularly when it is disrupting an existing market. And I have seen no evidence that speaks to that. If there were a market for affordable housing, one would think that the entrepreneurs in the development business have already come up with that. And the kinds of government intervention that we have are truly for low income and low income housing. We can argue the success of that, but there's a market out there, and I think that we need to really be very serious before we attempt to impose government restrictions on regulating a market.
The government restriction.
Mr. If I could, Mr. Chandler, do you mind if I?
Yeah.
Thanks. But doesn't this legislation, in fact, it's the opposite of restriction? I mean, it's not restrictive. It's basically saying, yes, you can do it. It's got to be clean and safe. So it's not creating a market. In a sense, it's moving with a market that already exists.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may add a brief thing that's.
Let's see what Mr. Arnett has to say.
Yeah. So I take your point, but what we're doing is taking an existing residential community kind of thing, and we're abrogating those people and those people who moved here for that purpose, and now saying you can't be here in a single family neighborhood. And I understand all the equity issues and those sorts of things. We were actually talking about this in the Environmental Matters meeting. It is the single family yards that are the ones that are the best in terms of stormwater conservation and in terms of managing stormwater flow. If we're going to expand the footprint and increase the impervious surface. So I think, in fact, I'm listening with my other ear to Eric Lashinsky talking to Eastport about the comp plan. I think there's a lot of conflicting things that we really goals that we need to sort out.
If I could, I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
But I'm really, I've pretty much said my piece. I'm not interested in entering into a debate on this. I can answer questions, and I'm expressing some of my concerns. I think enforcement. I do think usurping the parking, which in many places is already problematic, and which I hear a lot about. So I would want to have some more thought into how we deal with those. Those are things I hear every day from my constituents, particularly in the areas where there is no off-street parking, period. But those examples of off-street parking that do exist are quite limited in many of the places, and we're just treating it one size fits all.
Okay. Ms. Tierney?
Yeah, I thought of something for a compromise, and what if, and also to address the environmental issue where adding a more impervious area is probably not good, but what if we qualified it to be just existing footprints? In other words, you can have an accessory dwelling unit in your existing footprint, whether it's the base building itself or a garage, and in those, to address that concern about, increased density. I'm just throwing it out there in those zones, in single family zones. Could we amend it to say that that these would be there'd be no increase in the building footprint or additional? Do you know what I'm trying to get? What I'm getting at there?
Only allow conversions of existing structures. Is that the correct?
Yeah, for these single family zones, so they don't have to worry about, somebody.
Mr. Schandelmeyer,
yeah.
I mean, if that's what ends up passing, I would not try to end my own bill. It would still be something that accomplishes some of what I would like to accomplish with all of this. I do think the concerns are not that founded. 850 square feet is not a large area of impervious surface being added on, especially on a lot that's already cleared. And truth be told, a single family lot is not that effective at stormwater management, especially if trees and things have already been cut down. Regular old Bermuda grass doesn't do a good job at root retention or keeping water from rushing off, especially in heavy storms.
Okay, I think we've raised a lot of questions and raised a lot of, it's been a good basis for continuing discussion as part of the public hearing. What I think we should do is move on at this point to, first of all, public testimony, if that's acceptable. And first of all, public testimony, and then perhaps go over some of the written comments, if I'm able to scroll through them efficiently. Is there anybody here for live testimony, Mr. Jacques?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we have Laura Hanby and Susan Margiles. I'll start with Laura.
Okay.
Laura, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes, but just announce your name and your address for the record.
My name is Laura Hanby, and my address is 7055 Bayfront Drive. I'm in Ward 7.
Okay.
Okay.
Please, it's all yours.
Very good. I don't have prepared remarks. I'm just going to speak from the heart. I've been listening very carefully to everybody's comments, and I do sense some fear about what happens if an ADU is created. There's even verbiage like catching people. There's talk of enforcement concerns, parking concerns, and I do understand all of these concerns, but I very much applaud this legislation, the proposal, and the goal, certainly, of attempting to create additional housing, especially for low income people. I myself, I am actually, I have an apartment building in Wilmington, Delaware, a small one, 8 units, and I do have low income tenants there. And I do believe that it's important for a city to thrive to be able to allow and seek this kind of opportunity for people. So I just wanted to identify that, I recognize the goal from Mr. Schneidermeyer in terms of creating a housing opportunity. That said, I'm a recent entrant to Annapolis. I just bought my house in October of 2020. And so I'm a newcomer here, but I was born and raised in Maryland. I am really just coming home. And in part, that is because of my elderly parents who still live in Ellicott City, Maryland. I had been looking for housing even before the pandemic. I had been looking to return to Maryland, to return to the Chesapeake, which I love. And I unfortunately fell victim to not only a decision on my part to be on this side of the bridge. I'd had a small cottage near Crumpton years ago, but decided that Annapolis was the best place for me now so that I could be closer to my parents and closer to airports. In doing so, I apparently my budget had to increase significantly. Also, because of the pandemic, the home prices rose dramatically shortly after I began searching. So I ended up buying a home that was a bit of a stretch, larger than my original budget. But I did so because there was a finished basement in my home that I thought I could easily rent. It's a lovely space, and it did not occur to me that I would have difficulty advertising this for short-term rentals so that I could have the flexibility to accommodate my parents and my children who are now in college when they come home. So I very quickly learned that that I cannot have what is called an ADU, even though I have this lovely finished basement, because then I don't meet my zoning requirements. So in order for me to rent this place, even though I'm living right upstairs, the difference between having an ADU and not having an ADU for me is basically a door and or an oven hooked up. And even though there was an oven here in the kitchen when I got here, in order for me to be legal, my oven needs to be disconnected. So I applaud the legislation. I would hope that the legislation could be passed with some flexibility and recognize that homeowners that are doing this for the best interests of the community. In trying to create a rental, I am pouring money back into the community. I am currently licensed, but one of my big fears is that in order for me to not be an ADU and therefore to be allowed to serve as a short-term rental, I can't have a locked door between myself and the renters on the ground level. So that is a deep concern for me. I would like to see the legislation go through, but I would like to see it with some flexibility that recognizes homeowners are doing this in the best interest of Annapolis. This provides, I think, not only a need for potential long-term renters, but for short-term renters too. I do think that there's a lodging problem in Annapolis. I did advertise my place on Airbnb and VRBO. And I had, within 3 days, I had three contacts. 2 of those were parents of cadets who wanted to come and visit their sons and daughters at the Naval Academy for Parents Weekend. And and actually somebody this weekend. But my concern in particular is that that even though I have this lovely space, I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. If I present it as an ADU, then I cannot have short-term rentals. If it's not an ADU, then I can't have a door that provides privacy for both me and the renters.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Next, we have Susan. Susie, you there?
Hello, can you hear me? Just testing.
Yes.
Thank you so much, as always, for letting me come speak to you and letting me share my thoughts. My
Would you
name is
identify
Susan.
yourself and give us your address, please?
Yes, indeed. My name is Susan Margulies, and I live at 113 Conduit Street, right in the middle of the Historic District. And I am come to speak overwhelmingly in favor of building accessory dwelling units, legalizing accessory dwelling units, but requesting, please amend the bill, remove the ban on short-term renting, both the accessory dwelling unit and the primary residence. And I'm asking that you amend the bill to lift this ban for owner-occupied properties only. So I have lots to say, but first I'm going to digress just a little bit and say something about parking in the Historic District, just to respond to Mr. Waldman's earlier comments. Just reminding you that in the Historic District, every home is allowed 4 parking permits for street parking. And so yes, you certainly could rent a parking spot in Hillman Garage, but remember, every house is allowed those 4 parking permits. And on accessory dwelling units are already here in Annapolis. They're invisible, right? And on my little half block of Conduit Street, there was a beautiful accessory dwelling unit. There might even be 2, but one of them has been used as a long-term rental for a decade. At least a decade, and there's a lovely woman living in there. And the big historic home has no driveway, it has no parking, but the parking for the ADU just neatly fits under the 4 parking permit requirement associated with that big house. So just commenting that there are lots of ways of handling parking issues in places where it's such a problem that they've gone to regulate it. I think those existing parking regulations seem more than satisfactory to handle that problem. And now taking a left turn, talking about why I am such a proponent of ADUs and in particular lifting that short-term rental license ban. So of course, as Alderwoman Tierney said, most of us have lived in ADUs at some point in our life. I am certainly no exception. I lived in ADUs during my 2 postdocs. And of course, they were the cheapest rental option on the market, because what is lost in this discussion is the personality of the person living in the ADU and the personality of the homeowner sharing their home, sharing their backyard. Everybody gives up privacy. There is a certain personality here that is willing to both live in an ADU and house a person in an ADU. And for me, when I lived in an ADU, a basement walkout in Pennsylvania, I shared the vegetable garden with the homeowners. I would babysit their kids. I would run upstairs and turn the heat on for them whenever they were coming back from a vacation. When you live in an ADU, you kind of become part of the family of who lives in that house. And this is what I really want to get to. You cannot force this lifestyle. I want to see ADUs built. I want to see as many people who can build them, barring concerns about impervious surface, of course, to be able to. But taking away the flexibility of short-term renting, taking away that income stream, both for the newly constructed ADU and the primary residence, is really like hamstringing the process before it even gets started. And the bill as written, it might actually decrease the long-term housing stock, which is absolutely contrary to the writing of the bill. And the reason is, I'm one of the admins and one of the founding members of the Facebook group Support Annapolis STVR, and we have 322 members. And as such, I hear all the stories. And already I'm hearing people unhooking their stoves and changing out their stovetops for countertops. And if you disallow short-term renting of an ADU, that's what people will do. There will be a mass removing of stoves so that they continue to short-term rent. And then there won't be a seamless transition between a short-term rental and a long-term rental. There will be a barrier because you have to put that stove back. And so I'd like you to look at the testimony from Robert Mayer and Sarah Williamson. Those are two people who want to build an ADU over an existing garage. They want to use that ADU for long-term housing, but they'll only do that if they retain the flexibility to short-term rent their primary residence. They want to be able to go on vacation and supplement the cost of that vacation by short-term renting their primary residence. And of course, that's only going to happen a few weeks out of the year. In addition, you may build an ADU to house an elderly relative, as Laura Hanby said, and you might want to short-term rent it in the meantime. You may be advertising for a long-term tenant. And because this is your own backyard, because this is your own home, you have to be careful about who you rent to. You want to really search carefully and get someone who is going to plant compatible vegetables in your vegetable garden. And you're going to want a short-term rent in the meantime. So what I really want to say is lift the ban for owner-occupied homes on both the short-term rental, the ADU, and the primary residence. Get the ADUs built, and the change in personality, the change in lifestyle will happen gradually. You cannot force this, in my opinion. You cannot ask people to build an ADU and then force them into the long-term rental lifestyle of having that consistent, overwhelming shared space. And I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll plant my vegetables alongside yours. Thanks. Anybody else, Mr. Jacques?
No, Mr. Chair, that is everyone we have.
Okay. Are the commissioners interested in looking at the comments, the written comments that were provided, including a set of questions by the Eastport Civic Association?
Before we do that, can I have a go back on a question to staff?
Yes.
Based on something that I heard. Will the restrictions on renting the primary structure short-term be grandfathered for boat shows and commissioning week as pertains to other things around short-term rentals? And so would those sort of carve-outs be applicable here to the primary structure? So in that example that Ms. Margulies mentioned, that, you know, I want to go on vacation during commissioning week and I want to rent my house and to offset my vacation, could you do that if you had an ADU?
Let's look at the standards. It says a short-term rental operating license pursuant to Chapter 1744 may not be issued. I don't think you could, because you do need a license for Navy graduation and boat show weekends. You don't have to pay for that or have an inspection, but you do need a license because you have to pay taxes. So as written, you could not do that.
Is that true? You need to get permission to rent your house for commissioning week?
You don't need permission, but you have to pay taxes.
Okay.
I didn't know, people know
You
that?
have-
They have, yeah.
You have to apply for a free NBS rental license that then gets you in our system, so we know you are paying taxes on your short-term rental.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. So anyway, you don't think this would, this carve out wouldn't work if you had an ADU?
I think you would have to explicitly exclude the NBS licenses.
Okay.
Okay, anything else at this point? Written comments. Why don't I share the extensive questions of the Eastport Civic Association? Let me try to get to the top. Okay. Timing of the implementation, they're suggesting that you do it on a trial basis by allowing them in a few select zoning districts before allowing them on a widespread basis. Mr. Schandlemeyer, you have any thought on that?
Other cities have done the trials for us. I don't really see a need to do that. I think this is, truth be told, if this was implemented, it would just put a barrier in front of the construction of these, or the conversion of existing structures into these.
Okay. We answered the question about why some districts require a special exception and others do not, and that's because of the nature of the conservation districts. Is that correct?
That is correct. The special exceptions and things are in place for any construction of an accessory dwelling, sorry, I stutter sometimes. The exceptions are in place for the construction of any accessory structure, regardless of it being a dwelling unit or not. So this simply follows those protocols.
Okay. We've heard comment on existing ADUs, and many of them are not unknown and unlicensed. And I think that we've answered some of them. I might just point out that if I happen to have, for instance, my basement had been finished and I was renting it out illegally, and all of us, in order to make myself legal, I might have to put in fireproof drywall and sprinklers and hardwired systems. So it would be in my best interest, or I don't know about my best interests, but it would be in my short-term financial interests to just stay quiet and keep renting it. But I think that will come over time, is my feeling about how to bring people in, so at least we know what's going on. Buildable lot standards. The ordinance doesn't refer to required lot standards, but Dr. Nash did say that it needs to, any request needs to comply with both Title 21 and Title 17. So I think that question is answered. Environmental considerations. Many ADUs could be constructed in critical areas. Once again, I think the Titles 21 and 17 would address those concerns. I think that I'm correct on that. Owner occupancy requirement, quite common for ADU ordinances and other jurisdictions to contain a requirement that the owner live on the premises. That's not in this legislation, is that correct?
That is correct. This legislation prevents short-term rentals entirely as it is currently written. I am looking at other jurisdictions. I have had some meetings with members of the short-term rental community. I am sympathetic to some of their stuff. I'm working with some people who have put this forward in other jurisdictions, a big one being Councilman Reimer in Montgomery County, to see how they have set forward this standard. And I ideally want to try and accommodate as many people as possible, but I will say at the end of the day, my primary goal for this is longer term housing.
Okay.
But to clarify this, you wouldn't be allowed to rent both the primary and the accessory structure.
Correct. You have to, someone needs to be living on the primary premises, like in the main house, or living in the accessory structure and renting the main house.
Well, the owner of the property would have to be there. Yeah.
So, I mean, this sidebar kind of question was raised. Well, the primary owner wants to go on a vacation, and can that primary owner short-term rent the property while he's gone? And I don't know the answer to that. Do you have any thoughts on that by permitting? Well, there are actually two scenarios. One of them is that one that's sort of vacation kind of thing. But the other one is, you know, people have said, let people do what they want with their accessory units, long-term, short-term, whatever. You have any thoughts on that as to how it achieves your goals?
I again have had meetings with members of the short-term rental community. I am sympathetic to a lot of their concerns. I am talking to people who have put this forward in other jurisdictions. Ideally, I want to be on the side of longer-term housing.
Okay. Income enforcement, Dr. Nash, I think, addressed that in terms of her feeling confident to be able to handle it. But if there's an issue, that it'll arise. Income and rent restrictions. I think that part of this question, the reason this question arises is the difference between, quote, the definitions of affordable housing and what we call workforce housing. Both of them have meanings, and they're often used in, you know, sloppily. Affordable housing, I think, technically means like low income, what's not subordinate, subsidized housing. But I think what the impression I'm getting from Mr. Schandelmeyer is that the purpose of this is workforce housing. Is that a correct conclusion on my part?
Yes, this is a type of housing that, when implemented, can be attained by people who are bartenders and service workers. So now they live closer to where their job is in Annapolis and can walk or bike there, getting a car off the road. This is a type of housing for people who are just starting off and their career is currently a paid internship, and they don't have the amount of money to pay for something more established, like a single family unit or a townhome or a traditional apartment. This is for people who are in transition in their lives or careers. So that is what this is going to be primarily for, which is a market called the missing middle in our housing process in this city.
So actually, the question really is, I mean, it's really not addressed towards a low-income subsidized affordable housing. It's really, it's not pointed in that direction. And what you're saying is that the market will, if it works, it'll provide workforce level housing.
Correct.
In other words, there'd be no need for rent or income restrictions.
Correct. And I mean, this city's housing costs for rentals, even for people who have more established jobs, is out of reach for a lot of ordinary workers. Again, especially if someone is in transition or just starting out their career, or they work in the service industry. It's a fine way to make money, but it's not something that you can pay $3,000 or $4,000 a month on.
I have one question, and then I'll be quiet. Do you think that if you made these dwelling units available for short-term as well as long-term rentals, if you opened it up completely, do you think that there would be less of your workforce level housing, less of your long-term and more of your short-term rental? People would take advantage of it in that way?
I do not think it would remove the stock in its entirety. And I still do believe that a lot of the stock would remain, especially in neighborhoods that are not as tourist oriented, such as the historic district. It will take a few off the market here and there, but I don't think it's going to be this significant push.
What happened in Portland?
In Portland, I do not know if they put the actual ban on this or not. So I do not have any specific hard data in Portland other than there is about a 2% construction rate in single family lots.
I think that it would be interesting if somebody did a study to compare by economic zones or demographic zones. how many ADUs turn into long-term and how many turn into short-term rentals. And they look at it through the filters of income. Well, in the lower income areas, I suspect there'll be more long-term rentals, and in the higher income areas, I suspect there'll be a higher percentage of short terms. But that's just speculation on my part. But it'd be an interesting study. And it would answer that question that people are concerned about. Okay, I will stop this share. There are a number of other comments. Let me make sure. I'm not sure that I got this straight. No, this is wrong. Okay, I do not have any of the other comments that were received, but we did hear from Ms. Hanby and Ms. Margulies, both of whom made written comments. So we heard from them in live testimony. I'm sorry if I don't have anything more. Dr. Nash, do you know offhand?
All of the public comments that we received are in Trackit.
We can do that next time.
So they are available for anyone in the public under zoning text amendment or ZTA 2021-007. If you look under projects in eTrackit, they're all uploaded there.
And maybe what we'll do is we'll take a look at those the continuation of this hearing, and we'll go over them then. I think we've done enough for tonight. Does anybody wish to continue the discussion any further tonight? Okay, I think it would be wise to percolate, let this sit for 2 weeks. Let's see what kinds of questions and comments come up. Any of the older people who would like to be here next time, I encourage you to be here because you provide a perspective on this. And I appreciate your presence tonight and your comments. Mr. Chandler, you stood up pretty well. Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I think that we will temporarily suspend the public hearing and can reconvene at our next meeting, which is in early June. Is that correct? June something.
June 3rd, I believe.
June 3rd. Okay. And we'll see you then. Okay. Thank you very much, ladies.
Can we need to put some stuff in the record.
Well, why don't we put in what the only written document that I think I've referred to is the submittal by the Eastport Civic Association.
So you don't want to put the other
we have a
public
staff.
testimony. There's like 6 public testimonies that Sally referred to that can be put in the record.
Well, we can put them in the record, but I hope to remember or remind Mr. Ben Sale that next time if he wants to go over them publicly. But yes, put them in the record, put the staff report into the record too.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that should be it, Ms. Hook.
That's it.
Good, okay. Now, if I can sort of return to our agenda, I think that we have come nearly to the end. The only thing that we have left to discuss, Mr. Jacques, can you get Ms. Butler back on the line?
He should be back now.
Great, thanks. Is a discussion of proposed rule changes for ex parte communication. And I'd ask Ms. Butler to bring us up to date on that. Diane, are you present?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I'm here. All right, thank you. So I did send around the rules changes that the Board of Appeals adopted recently. And I thought that they did a good job of, dealing with conflict of interest and ex parte and communications. And the only suggestion I had was actually from you, Bob, about whether, with respect to the ex parte communications, there could be a commission override. So for instance, in the conflict of interest or appearance of conflict of interest, as soon as a commissioner realizes that they have a conflict or appearance of a conflict, the commissioner shall decide for him or herself if the recusal is warranted and place the reasoning on the record. And then the it's number or letter B says the applicant may request the commissioner to recuse. And then if I say, no, I think I don't have a conflict, the rest of the commission can take a vote and say, no, sorry, Diane, we disagree. Your husband's a developer and you're developing this piece of property. And yes, we think there's a conflict. So that override is really important in the conflict of interest situation. Because I may think I put it on the record and I can be fair and objective about a decision, but I have to trust that you guys will say, no, we don't think so. And that's an important part of the conflict of interest rule that I like about the Board of Appeals. And in fact, we had a situation when that has happened, but actually it happened with respect to ex parte communication. So that's conflict of interest. So any off the record ex parte communications or attempts by an applicant or agent or other party or individual to influence a commissioner on a matter before the commission shall be noted on the record by the commissioner. So I say, my neighbor so-and-so called and wants me to vote a certain way. And then I say, but now that I'm telling you that I heard from my neighbor and here's what they said, you have the same information that I have. And we all have the same, because we don't want ex parte communications because that looks like and can mean that you're doing backroom dealings. But as long as I tell you what that communication is on the record, and I am subjectively determining whether I can make a fair or impartial decision, I can say, I don't think I have to recuse myself, or I do. And in the Board of Appeals rules, there isn't what I call the override, where the commission can then say, oh, we disagree with you, like they can in the conflict situation. And Bob's comment was, shall we have the majority of the commission have the power to do that override? And honestly, I'm okay either way with that. I feel like, yeah, I'd love to hear Bob's comments on it, but that's, that's an issue that the Board of Appeals didn't include in their ex parte communication rule. I think we can if we think it's important. And let's see. Oh, if somebody recuses himself and it leaves the commission without a quorum, then essentially you have to postpone the vote until you have a quorum. So those are the changes. I think they're good changes. They've already been vetted through the Office of Law. So if everyone agrees to that, I think we have to have we have to post this and have it available for public comment for 30 days. If Jackie Rouse is still on the line, maybe she can confirm that.
I would just like to clarify that these rules that are proposed for the Board of Appeals are in the review process. Currently, they began their public hearing on this after the 30-day posting at their meeting Tuesday night, and the hearing is continued to their next meeting on June 1st. And then, there's a whole process laid out, but these rules, as they are written, have already been reviewed. They're not just something that they drafted by themselves. They were sent to the Office of Law, and the Office of Law also vetted them. But then even once the Board of Appeals adopts them, they have to go to the council to be approved also. So
that's interesting, because I know, and maybe Sally, you can help out. I think at one of these meetings you said because it's just a rules change, it wouldn't have to go to council. Can you clarify that? Because
there's new regulations that have been approved, or sorry, there's a new ordinance that has been approved about regulations, and there is a different process now.
Okay, great.
And the process that the Board of Appeals is following was even though they started on their process a few weeks before the legislation was adopted, mirrors pretty much exactly what is required in the new legislation. So all departments, commissions, boards, everyone who adopts rules and regulations now has to follow this same exact process, which has been codified. and which requires the rules then to go to the council for approval before they can, and then there are other steps in it. I thought I sent you all the memo where I listed all the steps. We'll be happy to do that. But my point in starting all of this was that the Board of Appeals has not yet, and they're accepting public comments now.
Okay.
But they feel pretty comfortable that, you know, based on the Office of Law Review, and I don't know if Joelle is still on the call, but or Mr. Lyles, I think, also had input on it, that what is in here is legally correct.
Okay. We've begun a public hearing on this issue, and the proposed rules will be posted.
They're
would
already
ask-
posted.
Okay, I would ask Diane to circulate once again a copy of what you have, and then I can't remember what I wrote, but maybe my comments, you know, but it by way of an email, just to refresh everybody's minds on this. And I would ask Jackie Rouse to, I don't know, send us the law or memo on the new process of imposing rules and regulations, because I think we need to know that. So we need to know when things will become policy by legislation and when things will become rules by legislation. Okay, so those two things, and I think would help us, and then we'll continue this hearing until June the 3rd. Mr. Arnett, we have a comment on this?
Just
Yes,
one more,
the-
Bob, this is
city
not really a
council-
hearing tonight on this because it's not listed as a public hearing on your agenda. It's listed as a business item, and I said, then wanted you all to have a discussion about moving forward with the process of getting to the point where you would,
Okay.
and that's
okay.
just a point of
Okay.
clarification.
Let's hear from Mr. Arnett, and then I'll bring the discussion back, and we'll hear from Mr. Pline, and we'll decide what we want to do.
So I was
Mr.
hoping
Arnett?
Mr. Braithwaite would jump in here. The council does not approve. What's required is a public posting on the city website and for 30 days, and also to send the proposed rules to the city council as a courtesy. The council does not approve new rules or regulations,
Yeah, I
but
would,
we can, within 30 days, say, wait a minute, we want to change the code so that it affects how your rules are going. But we've not got the council in the role of approving promulgation of rules.
right, that sounds more correct, because I know that the Office of Law wanted to kind of streamline it a little bit more, and not, and as was described, it would become a huge bottleneck at the council if you had to approve every single rule and regulation. All right, so, but nonetheless, I think I'd really like to see the legislation that passed on the process. I think that's important. And Diane, you'll send out both, you know, what you have on this. Now, gentlemen, what would you like to do? Would you, I mean, it's listed on the agenda, not as a public hearing. Are you interested in codifying these two rules on conflicts and ex partes?
Yes.
Okay.
And I think let's review the stuff that you suggested get passed around, because frankly, I've sort of lost lock on the
Sure.
on the current versions and stuff. And then I think at the next meeting, we can decide we should go forward or not with the formal process of posting and yada, yada, yada.
In order to keep it moving, are you interested in having this as a formal public hearing on the next agenda? And that will begin the clock moving. Do you follow me?
I think that sounds reasonable.
And then we can decide, you know, we can initiate a public hearing process. David? Okay,
Sure.
fine. Diane?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Rouse, could you make sure this is on the agenda as a public hearing?
You first have to post it for 30 days. The rules that you want to propose first have to be posted for 30 days before you can have the public hearing.
All right, well, we'll start it'll be up to Ben Sale, but we could start the hearing on the 3rd and then conclude it at the end of.
No, you can't have the public hearing until after the 30-day period.
How do I post it? Can I give it to you to post?
So I think,
You can
but-
send it to me and we would post it. I think we also, yes, we also have to have, yes, if you have rules, amendments to your rules, send me a copy. I will post them on the Planning and Zoning, Planning Commission webpage, just as I did for the Board of Appeals rules. And it has, and the way we posted those is it says, these are proposed rules change with a link to what they are. And, you can, and we set up a form for submitting comments, just like we do with legislation.
Okay, good. So it will kind of start the clock ticking. I would get that a move on so that
well,
the second meeting in June, we can actually begin deliberation.
I think we need to circulate that stuff around and come back together in our next meeting with a final draft of these things, all agree or not agree on that draft, and then send that out and start the posting process.
All right.
We also have to advertise it in the paper, just like it's an ordinance. That's also in the legislation. And I think that what Alex says is an excellent suggestion, because the board first circulated and agreed to all of their rules, and then had the Office of Law vet it, so that when they finally got to the point where they were ready to post it, they felt pretty comfortable that it was not going to be, that there may be suggestions, but they were feeling pretty comfortable that what they had done was legal.
Okay, I'm comfortable with that. And what I did was I just responded to, what Diane had sent me, which was the Board of Appeals stuff. And it was really, I thought it was very wordy. It wasn't clear. And I just, off the top of my head.
You had all those attorneys working on it, Bob, and you know how attorneys are.
Are they paid by the word? Which is why I'm a poor lawyer. Yes.
Excuse me. I don't know if Jackie, was that amended out as far as advertising in the paper?
No, it's in there. I have the ordinance up right now.
Oh, that's still in there about the paper ad? The ad in the paper. Wow, I thought that got out.
I'm looking at it and I don't see, I'm looking at the signed copy and yes. And a newspaper of general circulation in the city, and for not less than 30 days for the public to submit written comments.
For
Which
any
shall
rules
be made
change.
publicly available.
That's interesting. I
What
wouldn't
are we
imagine.
going to do? What are we going to do when Alden Capital destroys the newspaper? All right. So that we will have all of the matters in hand for the next meeting. We'll decide on the wording that we want, and then that will get posted, and then we'll start the 30-day clock. Okay, good. Okay.
Sounds good.
Anything else?
You mean anything else under that topic, or are we moving into miscellany?
Miscellany.
I do have a quick comment that I'd like to make regarding a letter that Mr. Hyatt wrote about my comments at the last task force update.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
It's your call.
Okay. I would just like to say that I'm very pleased with many of the ideas and recommendations taking shape within the Maritime Task Force. The good news is that by voicing the concerns which we have raised or have been raised by residents of Eastport and other areas, the task force has responded and will be taking steps to include recommendations to strengthen definitions and include elements of monitoring and evaluating as well as enforcement in the areas of concerns raised. Those concerns include enforcement of important maritime uses, including water access. Without going through a point-by-point rebuttal of Mr. Hyatt's letter, I respectfully disagree that statements I made were distorted. Let me assure you that there were no tactics involved with the feedback I gave to the task force, and appreciate the efforts that the task force has made to address the concerns. The process and feedback has been informative, useful, and hopefully will result in a better finished product. I am honored and appreciate having the opportunity to hear and comment on the good work the task force is doing to protect and enhance the maritime industry in Annapolis. That's it.
Okay. I know I put in a lot of time on that task force myself.
And I appreciate it.
We'll see. I'm not so sure that we accomplished anything for public access. That's a different issue. All right, ladies, gentlemen. Anything else?
I'm sending you the legislation right now, so everybody watch for the email. It's 0621.
Okay, Ms. Rouse, I will not be looking for it tonight. Will that?
Well, don't delete it tomorrow morning.
But don't take that personally.
I'm not going to take it personally. I'm just
All right,
going to
do I
do
hear a
it.
motion?
I motion that we end the meeting.
I second.
I move that we retire to a bar. All right, any discussion on an adjournment? Hearing none, I'm going to ask for a vote. All in favor of adjournment, please say aye.
Aye.
I hear no nays. Hey, very good. I thought that we went very well tonight, you know?
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah,
I
thanks for
really-
stepping in, Bob. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good job, Bob.